Juanetta Ayers. I'm the Executive Director with Commonwealth North. Welcome to this study session with the Fiscal Policy Study Group. With us this morning are Cheryl Frasca and Jennifer Johnston, who are our co-chairs. And I'm going to turn it over to Cheryl for any introductory remarks before we call on Senator Kaufman.
Well, thanks, Juanetta. Good morning, everyone. So glad to have you come together this morning. I'm not going to do any blah, blah, so we have maximum time with Senator Kaufman. Not to suggest that he's going to do the blah, blah, but we look forward to hearing from him about his proposed constitutional amendment for an appropriations limit. So, Senator Kaufman, welcome. Glad to have you join us this morning and appreciate your taking time. So back to Juanetta, to Senator Kaufman.
Okay, wow. Well, go ahead, Senator Kaufman. It's all yours.
Well, thank you. I'll try not to talk too much. I'm actually having that occupational hazard of losing my voice from blabbing too much. So it's a little rough this morning. I already went and presented to the miners group that meets down here this morning at 7. So I've been at it since that time. So I guess most of you have heard about the cap. I don't know if my website has a tab on it that has all the information that we'll be talking about. I can drop that link into the chat if you like, but it's easy to get to, senatorkaufman.com, and that's Kaufman, Kaufman. And so if you go there, you'll see two key pieces of policy that I'm putting forth: the spending cap, which I refer to as the diet plan, and then the reform of our Executive Budget Act that I refer to as the exercise. So diet and exercise for better fiscal performance. The simple story on the cap is that I started with a problem statement, and that was that we have episodes where we spend too much. Another piece of the problem statement is that we're blessed with an endowment in the form of the permanent fund, but if we're not careful, we'll get where we focus too much on that for our funding, is in essence our state's prosperity. We might lose track of the deeper economic activity that actually produces wealth in the state. So prosperity generally comes out of the ground or the sea. It doesn't just come out of thin air. That may change with carbon capture that we're talking about, but that's maybe a topic for another day. So the idea was, what can we do to create a cap that tethers what we spend to the health of our economy in some way? And so what I came up with, and worked it with economists both in Alaska and elsewhere, just benchmarking with folks, is a 5-year trailing average of our state economic performance in the form of our state domestic product, averaged over 5 years, and then spend a percentage of that. And so in the modeling that you'll see on the website, we pin the modeling for the constitutional cap to 14%, and then we pinned the statutory cap to 11.5%. And in the bill and the resolution, because there's both, and so that's SJR 4 and SB 20. So that's the resolution and the bill. What it does, it creates a resolution and a bill that works together to create a functional limit at that 11.5%, and then a hard limit at 14. In order to spend that delta between 11.5 and 14, it takes a 2/3 vote, and the purpose of that is to create a more reliable fund for our capital projects work. So that's capital spending. So the idea is to try and have a mechanism that connects government spending to how our economy is performing, but to smooth it and dampen it so that it's not harsh or abrupt, and then use the difference between the statutory limit and the constitutional limit to create more opportunity for the workforce development, the workforce retention that comes with capital spending, and then also to get just our backlog of work that we need to do in the state to keep things moving. One of the best things that government can do to enable commerce is to enable mobility. And so that's why there's the cap's built the way it is both to reference something that's beneficial for the state, and then also to create more opportunity by stabilizing our funding needs, and then also drawing that money we would have spent forth so that it's available for more productive use. So that's the cap in the nutshell. And I don't know, can we maybe get the website up on screen, and Juanetta, if you're able to do that.
Yeah, give me 1 second and I'll get it loaded here.
Thanks. I'm going to take a sip of coffee
Okay.
and try and keep the voice working.
Okay, you should see that now.
Okay, there we go. So if you can just scroll down a little bit, and there you go. So that's a good place to park right there. And so every spending cap, it has, what's in, what's out. And you'll see underneath the video there where it says spending subject to limit. So that's a pretty typical list of, in caps that have been proposed or discussed. There's not much different there. And, but of course that's subject to change through the amendment process, but that's the way it's structured right now. And then as structured right now, if you look at the chart, you'll see those gold bars, which represent our historical spending. And again, that's of the spending that's referenced under the cap. You'll see that the blue line is the new proposed statutory limit, 11.5%. And the black line is the new proposed constitutional limit at 14. And then you see our old cap, the current limit, it's way the heck up there. My nickname for it is the perfect law, because it's never been broken. We haven't been able to punch through that. So it was set at a level and then adjusted for inflation, and it just never had any beneficial effect. So if you look at the chart, you'll see the gold bars that penetrated the 14% constitutional limit that's proposed. Had this been in place, those funds would have been swept forward and would have been available for what I'm proposing, which is a healthier bandwidth of capital versus operational spending. And the other things to note, the smoothing effect that you have in the constitutional limit, it ebbs and flows with our economic activity, keeping government linked to what we're doing in the private sector, but doing it in a way that's not harsh, and also doing it in a way that has an offset. If you have a 2-income family where you have a private sector income and a public sector income in a household, this will help avoid the synchronized layoff syndrome that we've gotten into in the past, that some people really have sharp memories of it when I talk to them, because they were bit by it at times where it's happened, where both spouses lost their source of income because we had a big downturn in oil, and then we had a consequential downturn in government, and people lost their jobs and were both on the unemployment rolls at the same time. Having the 5-year trailing average creates that pivot point in the center where government spending can continue to project forward against a solid number, and then the economy will start to lift back up. So it's a desynchronization mechanism. Speaking of desynchronization, the federal inflation numbers that we could react to are often not indicative of what's happening in Alaska. We operate on our own cycle. And so the reason why, again, picked Alaska's economic activity as I feel our best metric is it measures what's happening here, not in the lower 48. The averaging gives us a good smoothing effect. And it, again, causes government to have to, even as the permanent fund grows as a source of revenue for running government, it causes the state government to have to remember that, true prosperity comes from our private sector. I'm sorry, my voice is going again. So I'll just say I kind of ran the table with all of that. So Any questions for me?
Okay, well, let's open it up to questions and Cheryl, do you have anything to start off with that you'd like to ask?
Oh, sure. Thank you. Thank you, Senator, for providing the information. My theory about spending limits is, my theory about spending limits is those things that are excluded are what you get more of. And so by excluding the dividend, you get more of the dividend. By excluding debt, sure, we have to meet our obligations, but that encourages using debt for capital projects, which you talked about how important they are. So help me feel better about those two provisions of your proposal.
Well, as far as when you're dealing with a constitutional amendment, one has to avoid, I'll say, creating a Swiss Army knife with too many blades on it, right? Because you can't get it through. So the cap, as far as what's in and what's out, that's all going to be subject to amendment as we go through the process, and we'll see where that ends up being. I hear you, and that's something we can look at. As far as the second part of your question, so
it was about capital and debt. When you certainly it's important to keep our obligations, pay those, but to incur new debt, use the credit card when you have excess, you have available revenues that you could be using, but they require a 2/3 vote.
No, I hear you. So yes, and so that the other part that I was forgetting to respond to was the permanent fund. So the permanent fund, I believe that has to be a separate solution. So this is not designed to get a bigger dividend or a smaller dividend. This is designed around that for a couple of reasons. One, politically, combining the two, trying to solve the dividend question and the cap at the same time would be extremely difficult. And then structurally, trying to do too much in as far as a constitutional amendment could get you into revision territory, and then you'd get hung up on that. So I don't believe that I can touch all the places in the Constitution with one blade in order to do it. So the joke I have is, well, this is kind of a buck knife. It's not a Swiss Army knife. So I'm not trying to fix everything. As far as the resolution to what's going to go on with the dividend, I believe that a new formula that's less than the old formula is what's in the cards. It's just not in here, and because I don't believe it's the proper place to put it. I think politically and also just structurally that has to be solved in its own piece. And there's some things in the background on that. I don't want to speak too much on that because I'm really not focused on the dividend. I'm focused on, right now with how can we structure a cap where it actually benefits, by benefiting the private sector, it benefits government to be better managed.
Okay, and I appreciate that. But on your slide from your website, it says that you exclude permanent fund dividends, and so that's what I was triggering on, excluding it from the spending limit.
Fair enough, but I believe that the way, let's say if this actually moves, it's going to end up being part of some multi-part grand bargain. There's going to be, 5 things on the table, and I'm putting this forth so that a cap is at least at the table, and hopefully a cap that I believe measuring our economy is a better reference than just pinning to an amount of spending and correcting it for inflation going forward.
Right.
I've seen the modeling on those, and they don't work. Either they're too harsh, or they're too loose. And so the idea of creating a rolling average that is measuring our economic activity and reminding government, hey, we're doing good, or hey, we're not doing so good, slow down a little bit, and doing it with that leading lagging offset. That's really, that's the heart of what I'm proposing. What's in and what's out, and also what the numbers are. 11.5%. I'll be dead honest. We just pulled that from what the 22 numbers were. So this is what we're spending in 22. Let's pin to it. That's how we created the 11.5%. Does it need to be a little up or a little down? Well, that's the political argument around spend more or spend less. And the same thing, with again, that upper limit at 14%. That's kind of like, well, let's create some bandwidth, and it's 14. Is it going to be 15 or what? So that range, the idea is to have a range and have that range where it's accessible by supermajority and get ourselves into a healthier general level of spending. But the bill I gave the companion bill, so it's over in the House. Representative Stapp is running the bill in the House. I expect it will come out of House Judiciary and be in House Ways and Means. And that's where we can expect to see probably a lot more debate about the fiscal aspects of it. And the what's in and what's out. As far as debt, I hear you. That can be in there, but we just need to have the discussion.
Good. Okay.
Okay. All right. I'm going to go to a question in chat and then I'll come back to Marianne Peace. But so stand by, Marianne.
Okay, thank you.
So Jennifer's question for you, Senator Kaufman, is have you done a historical trend of the major drivers in state GDP, say over the last 20 years in terms of real dollars? And then she's added, what designated funds are you excluding?
So, well, the modeling that we're presenting here and the backup data for it is across this time frame, 03. And so with data, it's tough. You can try to compare an apple to an orange because things were different at that point. So the modeling that we've been able to do is the modeling when time frame for which we have the data in kind, I'll say. And so that's what we've modeled. And then the other piece is, as far as the DGF, I would have to go back and look at exactly what that list of DGF that it is. I haven't looked hard at that. But again, it's where if the concept of DGF is just respecting that. So, but I don't have the list of exactly what's in and what's out on the DGF, but I can find that out and get back with you.
Okay. Did you have a follow-up, Jennifer? Let me take you off mute.
Still muted.
Yeah, there you go. There you go.
So reason I bring that up, I mean, I'm fascinated with this idea. And I think it's very interesting. If you look over 20 years, of course, our GDP is very much at the whims of the world because most of it is resource export, fisheries, mining, et cetera. But also large in that GDP is not only just sort of the transportation, warehousing, and real estate that goes with those industries. I wonder, there's probably a large historical trend of healthcare. And I just think it's probably worth looking at because it's also a driver in our cost. So I think it'd be interesting to have to have Ledge Finance do a historical trend of what our GDP is and what drives it, just so in your debates you have a discussion that has some good, strong economic input.
No, that's good. And yeah, we're pulling modeling from, as you know, how we roll down here from Ledge Finance all the time. So Alexi Painter and his team are just an incredible resource that we're lucky to have. So
right, and you can probably go to economic trends, but I think getting a good concept of what the state's GDP, because I have a feeling we're also in a huge transition with GDP, and that's going to make a difference of whether this is a good concept or a bad concept.
Well, with GDP being the measurement, the sum total of all economic activity in Alaska. I guess in response, I would say, well, we've always got to have something, and we don't want it to shrink, and we have to guard against the excesses that when we do get extra money, as some people look at it. So I think we don't want to get into a case where we don't have a state economic production that wouldn't support spending. So what are we going to do to prevent that? Exactly what form of economic activity it is isn't really, that doesn't affect the total. It's so differences within it, whether it's oil or gas or gold or fish or even healthcare. So whatever creates an economy, if it's in the blend, it's counted as the sum total of all economic activity in state. But I can try and find out what that blend looks like. I think that's what you're saying.
Right. I think you need a historical blend, just because going forward, you're gonna, I mean, it's gonna require, as I say, if you look at healthcare is also probably, while we've had a little respite from COVID, I think you're going to see that it's going to be a major driver in public expense here soon again. And so I think, the awareness quotient is probably worthy.
Okay, so you're saying not in the blend of what creates our GDP or state domestic product. You're saying in what is creating our expense on the expense side?
No, it's both. It's both. And it's just, I think we need to be, I think it's an interesting concept. I'm fascinated by it, and it's just the more the better it is.
Mm-hmm.
Especially as you're kind of, going at darts as far as 11 or 14% or what's included and what's excluded. And and of course I would be like Cheryl saying, you've got to include all appropriations if you're really going to have a spending cap of any sorts. Because I mean, the legislature has not been able to do its spending cap to date, which is revenue. So.
Yep. Well, speaking of throwing darts, part of putting this out there is I'm asking everybody, find the holes and poke them in it if you can. I really want to have a public discussion about this. And again, the heart of the concept is that 5-year trailing average of economic activity. That's really the piece of it that is the heart of the proposal. Around the edges, what those ratios are and what's in and what's out, that's all going to change by the time this thing gets out. So yeah. I appreciate the feedback.
Okay, we'll go to Mary Ann for your question now.
Yes, good morning, Senator, and thank you so much for your presentation. This may not be considered part of the spending cap, but given Senator Lisa Murkowski's speech yesterday on the amount of billions of dollars that will be coming in to the state coffers and the amount of state funds that are needed to match some of these capital project outlays, like for transmission and everything else, how do we account for that windfall while maintaining a spending cap on the capital side of things?
Thank you. Juanetta, can you go back to the website and just?
Yeah, 1 second.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, just scroll so I can see the top of the chart a little bit. Yeah, there you go. No, yeah. So the position that we've been in. So if you look relative to this cap, you have to imagine where it's been in place to have had some beneficial effect. And when we have a peak revenue year where we're beginning to retain those reserves and we have them available. So the condition that we get into, and we've been there, if you look at some of the lean years, 17, 18, where our spending was limited because we had at a previous point had pushed more money out of the building than I would say, according to this cap, than we should. And we didn't have it retained in order to use it. So the federal spending, that federal amount it's not subject to the cap. So what you would need to spend would be that amount, which would enable the federal spending, but you would be limited, by the 14% hard cap as far as your total spending. The problem is, if you start getting much beyond that, you're getting back into the world that we're in right now, where we overspend and then don't have the reserves, where we've depleted savings for whatever reason, or perhaps we poured money as episodes into capital spending, but then later we don't have what it takes in order to continue to do the preventative maintenance and keep that whatever we built in good order. And in some cases, I would argue that perhaps what we spent didn't really return value because we were spending in a hurry, and that's never a good thing. I liken it to the lottery winner syndrome, where you get a bunch of money, build more house than what you really need, and then a few years later you're finding out you can't run and maintain that house, and next thing you know, the news story about the lottery winner is that you went bankrupt. So the idea of the cap is to actually cause that money to be available by limiting what happens to it when we don't tend to our business and maybe overspend a bit.
Okay, and Cheryl has a question, and then we'll come back to chat. Go ahead, Cheryl.
Okay, does somebody else have a question? I don't want to, if somebody else has got.
I think it's a comment, but go ahead.
Okay, all right, Senator, I think from a public's perspective, the concern is the recurring costs and having a lid on how much recurring, i.e. operating budget costs, can increase over time versus the capital side, the infrastructure investment, which candidly ends up being private sector jobs too. And so what your proposal does is it gives, not carte blanche, but you've got increases built, assuming GDP, is increasing. You're allowing the operating budget to increase, but you're creating more hurdles for the capital budget by saying a 2/3 vote. So anyway, what we'll do is we'll follow up with some comments and observations from our study group. So you don't have to, so instead of just blah, blah, blah. And then is there any other state or government that uses GDP as a?
Not GDP. The availability of the data, the data capture and processing capabilities have made this measurement, a reliable measurement of this, available. Other states have economic indicators that they use, like personal income, and personal income is a subset of GDP. GDP is more holistic. So other states are using economic indicators, like Colorado comes to mind. And but what we've learned is that the ability to actually measure GDP is, that data capture has become a lot more dependable, and so it's readily available now. So I think if other states were doing it now, they might look at GDP rather than personal income.
Okay, because putting it in the Constitution, and if GDP turns out to not be a predictor or a leveler as anticipated, would be a concern because it's in the Constitution. So perhaps a statutory limit for a while, and then take it to the voters if it truly is working as you anticipated. Just thinking out loud here. So I'm done. Yeah,
I appreciate that. And is this worthy of being put in the Constitution? You want to put, sometimes I feel people try to put 5-year statute in the Constitution when we need to be thinking more 50-year. We need to be thinking long term. I've thought a lot about using, our core economic performance as the indicator. And I, I think it, I think it's worth the risk, um, because the absence of doing something that ties our state spending to the health of our economy, I believe that's the greater risk. The permanent fund is a wonderful thing. There is the risk, though, that it creates like the endowment mentality, and our future condition will be where more than enough government is fully funded by the POMV.
Mhm.
A service sector will exist because the fully funded government sector will need service sector, as will the tourist industry, tourism. So you'll really only have that part of our economy if we allow ourselves to become financialized, is the term I use, where most of our needs, I'm kind of like that. This legislature job is great, but I'm financialized by my retirement savings. And so I don't really have to do productive work. I can come here to the Capitol and do this. There, I said it. I said the quiet part out loud. So we don't want our state to become that way, where they're fully funded, as I am, and then we can go do government. We have to create something that links what we're doing. For a state with a big endowment, it's more of a risk than anything else. Is we can't forget our private sector, our resource development, the things that actually create I call it the deeper economy. And that's where, wealth comes from the ground in some form or fashion. You're going to farm it, dig it, plow it, pull something out of it, or the sea. With carbon capture, like I said, maybe we'll start pulling some wealth out of the air if these carbon capture ideas pan out. But we really need to do some form of resource development of building ourselves up with what we have available. I think that's the big risk. The other way to do this, to create that linkage, is, I feel, a riskier or less preferred one is tax. So taxing is a way of tying what the government spends to what we do, but we're in a unique position. I think we can create a linkage that's healthier than a tax, reminds government of the economy in a meaningful way by tethering what we spend to the health of our economy.
Okay, thank you, Senator. Drew Kaysen is on with us, and I'm sorry, I don't know Drew personally. I think Drew is a man. I'm not sure, or he, she. I don't know. We won't do pronouns today, but Drew is on with us, and is asking. Well, first of all, there was a comment earlier about just the growth in healthcare, and that just this rapidly aging population is going to have increasing demand for health services, and independent of the question of service costs, health service costs. So simple economics, that sector is going to be definitely growing, probably regardless of cost, I think is the point there. Drew's also saying that GDP has a lot of pros, but how do you handle the high volatility of GDP because of commodity prices? Oil is the specific difference.
Happy to answer that one.
Yeah, and then Drew's adding that they love the connection to the economy, but not sure that simple GDP is reflective of economic productivity.
Well, back on that chart, the kind of that organic rolling nature of the ebb and flow of those lines is reflective of our GDP. And the reason why it's smooth, I would say the bars are too. Our spending is related to revenue. So that's how we live right now, like spikes, and then we drop. What you actually get from the 5-year trailing average is a much smoother process control on it. So we looked at different, the 5-year trailing average is the mechanism that takes away that volatility. But where we live right now is with volatility. We have revenue, we spend it, and then we don't have revenue. We're running around with a tin cup trying to figure out how to fill it. So the smoothing mechanism of 5 years, and we played with longer or shorter, but 5 seems to be the sweet spot based upon the modeling that we did. You don't want to be so underreactive that you're not in the proper frame, or too reactive. And so with all the playing around that we did with it, 5 seems like a magic number. The length of typical recession, it responds well to that in our modeling. And there's another thing, it kind of rhymes with the 5% POMV, the 5-year trailing average. So this is sort of the way to think of it, is the POMV for our economy. If we can protect the permanent fund, I believe it deserves to be that the POMV, some form of it, constitutionalized. I agree with sweeping the corpus and the earnings reserve, managing it as a singular fund with a POMV that's at least a certain cap that is in the Constitution. I think that's good policy. And then the companion to that is to have a similar mechanism to protect us from what we could spend by creating a similar construct, but for the private sector. So we have the permanent fund. That's a piece of our revenue stream, and I think we need to protect that. But then we also need to protect the state spending habits by linking with a mechanism that's similar to that POMV withdrawal, but designing it so that it works to protect our private sector. And again, the domestic product is the sum of all economic activity. So it's the most holistic, and therefore in its own way, it's the most average. It's not just inflation and population. It's not just, spending in a certain sector. It's the sum total of all economic activity in the state. And anytime you're measuring, if you think of all the gauges in your car, that oil pressure, they're all telling you stuff, and it's all important. But the thing that's really probably the most important is the speedometer that's telling you how fast you're going. So that's kind of the sum. That speedometer is not going to be showing you that speed if you lost oil pressure and the engine blew up. So it's the holistic measurement. So, but I'm open to suggestions.
Okay. Thank you, Senator. Jennifer Johnson is adding that the capital expenditures have a direct result on the spending cap, and it will raise the GDP. She's suggesting it will raise the GDP through transportation, warehousing, real estate, health, those kinds of sectors. Any thoughts about that?
Spending, if we have more construction projects, that does add to our GDP, in the form of that economic, the resulting economic activity. If somebody has a job and they buy a car, that becomes part of our state domestic product. I don't think it's a deal killer. I think that's part of the measurement. And if we do develop the jobs, and we do keep the people that do the work, and we do have the companies that are, that own the equipment and get the contracts and do the work, I think that's still healthy. I don't think it really moves the needle in a negative way, in that we could be juicing our numbers by doing that.
Mm-hmm.
So I think we've got that covered.
Okay.
But I appreciate the thought.
Yeah. Well, I'll just add a thought about GDP, because I think it's really kind of what everybody's teasing around the edges of, is that our tax structure in the state doesn't really tax a lot of economic activity. And while GDP may be a measure of spending, some of it, there's a little bit of a sort of a phantom economy, if you will, because even like with the total state budget, so much of it is federal spending, and it's not generated locally. It's not generated by true economic activity on the ground in Alaska. And so sometimes I think GDP may give an impression of more robust activity and growth than actually exists on the ground. It's not self-determination, if you will, as a terminology, but I mean, obviously it's a number that is used broadly and has a lot of data collection behind it. So I definitely understand why it's the number that you look to. And I'll just add a question that you referenced and used the term the grand bargain, and we've kind of teased around some of that. So could you maybe speak to what do you feel the appetite is in the legislature for a grand bargain this year?
Well, I think it's growing. And the so-called grand bargain, I guess what I'm referring to is all the elements of comprehensive fiscal reform. So I've got a couple pieces. So I've got the Executive Budget Act reform to try and just push us more towards performance management in our budgeting processes. I've got the spending cap, and again, that's so the two together. I think of that as the diet and exercise, a little bit more lean management and a little less binge consumption. So that's the diet and exercise plan. And I don't know, hang on a minute. And I don't know who all seen these, but I have spending caps. And so I'm having a lot of fun with those. We've gone through a box of them. I'm down to my last sample, so we're getting some more. But you wander around the Capitol, people come to my office, they say, I keep seeing those hats everywhere here. So folks they're taking the hats and they're sitting on shelves around in the Capitol. As far as will we get to a point, and Jennifer, you know this very well, the way the building works is that pieces and parts sit around, and then at some point, if they're there and they're there when they're needed, that they can suddenly move, and they can move quickly. I get a sense that where we're at right now, what happened last year with the Senate budget, the turducken budget, which I wasn't happy about it, but I voted no and took the beating for voting no and sending it back for concurrence. I think that maybe scared some people. And the 5% POMV, that's statute, and we can walk all over that too. And so I think that was like a near miss. And maybe it was even a bit of a fender bender, because even what we ended up with was a little too rich for what we should have spent last year. So I feel last year was a cautionary tale. And I think so maybe some people see risk where they thought that they were always going to be able to manage it. None of us are going to be around here forever. Some of us for not very long at all. And so I think some folks that we'll start looking at what kind of structures can we leave behind to drive down the noise level on these fiscal arguments that we're having. So I feel that, it's closer this year than it was last year. But last year is part of the reason why it's closer this year. So, I mean, I've been interviewed. Let's see, I've had news crews, on-camera interviews. I've had 3 of them. Channel 2 came to my house and set up in my dining room and did an interview with me. The industry folks, the Alaska Chamber, the Alliance folks they're having me come to events and speak. And I mean, I spoke to the miners about all this morning, and now I'm here with you. So the energy level around a cap, around an idea, this is gaining traction. I think I have some hope for the Executive Budget Act of at least having that discussion around performance management. I know other people are looking for revenues, and that's not my new revenue in the form of new economic activity. I'm all, let's do it. New revenue as far as let's tax what we've got harder. Not so much, but will some grand bargain come out of that? You have the framework from the Fiscal Policy Working Group output, which would that's there, and that kind of has, I would say, a framework and the elements of the framework, whether it's some form of new revenue, some form of cost reduction, some form of cap. It's non-specific about the type or style, but that framework is there, and it does get referred to in conversations around here. When are we gonna dust that off and look at it and at least move some essential pieces? When it comes to me, what I always say is that the cap is the foundation. These are the one-pagers that if I don't care who you are, if you come into my office, I'm going to hand you one of these and talk to you about the cap, and I'll probably do it repeatedly on that annoying spending cap guy. I believe a well-designed cap is the key to the other reforms that people want, because it basically sets the fences, the framework of what we can work within. So some say, well, we have to have an income tax before I'll vote for your cap. Hang on a minute. Let's look at how it works and see if you still feel that way. And usually I can talk folks through where they realize they don't have to be transactional about this. They don't have to pin something else to it, that it's actually a good first step. And so that's the conversations I'm having, but likely it'll, if it moves, it'll end up sitting in rules where things sit, and we'll if we are able to get through the finance committee, and I think that's possible in the House side of it, and that's why I have the companion going over there. So we've had 3 hours of hearings in the House in the previous legislature on this, and we actually, the companion bill, I got it moved through the Senate all the way to finance. So it's already done that last year, and I didn't have anybody interviewing me on TV or writing articles. James Brooks wrote a nice article about it. So I'm getting newspaper articles and the video media. So it's different this year.
Okay.
Bit of a filibuster there. I'm sorry, but
That's okay. That's all right. Well, again, mindful of your time. We did have a couple of other questions, and apologize to folks that we didn't maybe get to your comments or questions.
if
But
you
I am reminded by Ian Lang, who's online with us today, that the Fiscal Policy Study Group, and Cheryl was one of the primary co-authors of that in 2017. Really put together what was a set of recommendations about what a grand bargain might look like. So, we're the pieces and parts and the timing of all of those things, I think, is the art of how it gets done. Knowing what needs to get done and getting it done are two different things, I suppose. But Cheryl, I'm going to come back to you and ask you for any closing thoughts and remarks.
Okay, well, thank you, Senator. We really appreciate your time this morning and the opportunity to talk with you about your proposal and your openness to comments and suggestions that folks may have. And with that, if you want to check out, you're welcome to, and then we'll just talk about you when you leave.
Okay. My ask is there were good questions here. If you could just put them as bullet points in an email and get them back to me, some of the stuff that I was slow on or maybe didn't understand the question, let me take another run at it, and we'll respond in email to any points or questions that were made with the information we have available. So. Okay,
and we'll also, from our perspectives, offer some suggestions or issues that concerns about the proposal. So we'll do a two-way share there. So.
All right. Well, I'll punch out, and my ears will start burning, and I'll go get another cup of coffee. So.
Okay. All right. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me. Okay. Bye-bye.
Thank you. And to that end, if you do have suggestions The questions in the meeting chat, we'll extract that and put that into follow-up with Senator Kaufman. But I would like to offer some comments to him, as well as the legislation moves through the legislature, i.e. House Ways and Means, so that we can be interactive there and participate. Because yes, Ian, thanks for mentioning, I actually have the 2017 report that we did as a fiscal policy study group. I'm at my elbow, literally, because I was looking for it the other day. So it's amazing. I guess you just have to repeat is what's necessary. So, okay, so if you have suggestions, get them to Juanetta, all right? And we'll combine them into a document and questions that you would like to get more information about, and we'll do some follow-up and interaction. Okay, any other comments from folks while we're...
Am I on mute?
No, you're open. Go ahead.
I was just typing that the second part of his program, the exercise program, I can't help but giggling because Cheryl is the actual queen of performance measures in administrations. and I have worked many years with Cheryl, both municipality and state, on a performance measures. It'll be interesting. That is sort of, there's a lane of operation, legislative administration. So it'll be interesting where that goes. But I just want to make sure everybody knows Cheryl's history.
Yeah, thanks. You can see how effective it's been.
Well, I think regardless of how, I think you can put together a very effective framework. My experience on the operational side as a division director, inheriting a set of performance measures, it was like, what's the history and why are we measuring these things? And as personnel changes, institutional knowledge does not get transferred. And sometimes there's a real dumbing down of the performance measures. One of the performance measures for one of the sections in my division was how many brochures did we distribute? And it's like, really? Why is that a performance measure?
Well, Juanetta, you're absolutely right that good performance measures are important, but there's management measures, and then there's things that to report to the public, the return on the investment in public services, and how do you measure, report, and share effectiveness of those services, not the number of services.
Mm-hmm.
So it is, but the legislature, it's important to departments to also have the legislature, in my opinion, and what I heard from the departments back in the olden days, was they wanted they could go through and do all of this work, the departments, in providing this good information, but then the legislature completely ignores it. And so that's where you have to find out and work with the legislature to have them be also engaged in having it be meaningful measures. To not only the departments, but to the legislators and to the citizens. So it's a task. But anyway, I'll get off my soapbox. But thanks, Jennifer.
Go ahead, Cheryl.
No, I'm done.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, thank you, everybody, for joining us today. And we will have a session next Friday, March 3rd. That will be a noontime session with Senator Bill Wylakowski to talk about his proposal to constitutionalize the dividend. And so sharpen your questions and bring those to next week's session. I think many of you are already registered for that. And we have some other sessions in the work as well. We'll continue to invite folks who are proposing elements of fiscal policy. And again, as Cheryl mentioned, please do email any follow-up questions, and we'll get those to Senator Kaufman and share his response with everybody.
And also comments and suggestions for the legislation. Yeah, not just questions, but potential changes.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Thank you.